Australia is one of the countries that has done actually quite well, I believe. I would like to say the same for the United States, but the numbers speak for themselves. And we are essentially still going on a day-by-day basis, getting worse and worse.
Well, what would that mean if Australia is doing quite well? Okay, well, Dr. Fauci wants us to be more like Australia. Well, while the COVID outbreak in Australia has been relatively mild, their containment efforts turned a once-free country into a dystopian nightmare in places. Just look what happened in the country's second largest city of Melbourne. For 111 days, okay, do the math of how many months that is. Most businesses were closed. Hundreds of thousands lost their jobs. People were forced to stay in their homes except to go buy food or go to work. The government even put limits on how much time people could spend for outdoor exercise. And even though the lockdown was technically lifted yesterday, residents are still prohibited from going outside the city limits. Joining me now, live from Melbourne, is someone who is living in this situation, Gideon Rosner, Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs. Gideon, thank you for joining us during your interesting time there. Now, some might say that relatively low count of active cases proves that everything you did for months and months and months of lockdown worked. What's the response?
Look, my response is that Australia was very lucky that we had a very mild onslaught of the coronavirus, but Anthony Fauci himself has admitted that that's largely because Australia is an island nation. We do not have porous borders like they do in Europe. And our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, like President Trump, shut down travel from China early. And like President Trump was criticised for being xenophobic for doing it. But that mostly gave us an advantage in the coronavirus. What's different about Melbourne is our government stuffed up our quarantine system, allowing private security guards that were hired under very dubious circumstances, and largely because of their diversity and inclusion policies, to stuff up hotel quarantine and let it flood back into Melbourne. Since then, as you said, we have endured a 111-day lockdown. Businesses have been shut forever. We've seen old ladies getting kicked off park benches. A woman was arrested. A pregnant woman was arrested in Ballarat outside Melbourne for making a Facebook post about an anti-lockdown protest, despite the fact that the police here in Victoria have allowed Black Lives Matter protests to go ahead, no worries. We are living through, Laura, right now, the biggest incursion into our liberties and livelihoods that we've ever seen on Australian soil. And if Americans want that, by all means vote for Joe Biden. But as far as I can tell, Donald Trump is the only thing standing between Americans and that situation. And you are so lucky to have a president who's talking about keeping things open.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Fauci is trying to say, oh, no, we're not for lockdowns. I think he's saying that because he sees they're increasingly unpopular. In the Midwest, where I am right now, in Minnesota, I just saw thousands of people. They don't want any more lockdowns. They don't want any, they want to wash their hands. They want to wear masks. They'll wear masks, but they do not want restrictions on their freedom. And I have to tell you, there was this medical expert on another cable outlet, MSNBC, said this last night. Watch.
Looked at Australia, where they have been effectively controlling the pandemic and controlling it without a vaccine or without a drug. What have they done? They followed the standard rule book for public health. They have identified people who are infected, isolated them, and quarantined them for some time. We can do that in America.
Now, Gideon, what's your message to the medical establishment? He's kind of the poster child for the medical establishment pushing this nonsense.
Well, that is exactly the same attitude and medical establishment that we've had in Melbourne. Look, I can't tell the American medical establishment what to think, and frankly, they probably wouldn't listen to a guy like me anyway. But to the American people, I say what we've done in Australia is shut down our parliament, suspend democracy, and give our chief health officer, a bloke who makes Anthony Fauci look like Albert Einstein, a bloke named Brett Sutton, we have given him complete control over the pandemic response. And as a result, as I said, we have seen enormous curbs to our freedoms. We've seen suicide hotlines being flooded with calls. We've seen children as young as 12 being put on antidepressants. I have here my work permit. my work permit that until very recently I was forced to carry in case I was checked by the police in the street to present my papers that showed I was allowed to be outside my own home. And if I couldn't do that, I could have been fined up to $7,000. Again, the medical establishment will always say what the medical establishment says, but they don't govern the United States of America. The people do, and the people have to reject what the hell that we've been through here in Melbourne.
Well, it seems like a lot of people in Melbourne like lockdowns, though, because unless they say no to lockdowns and vote out these people, including Mr. Andrews, and vote these people out, you're going to keep getting lockdowns. Same thing in the United States. I don't think people want them anymore. Gideon, we've been wanting to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us and telling these stories. It is terrifying. And as Melbourne slowly